And while it wasn't that true escape that we were looking for, it wasn't, this fantastic, we run something inside the guest and something, boom, pops up outside the host. It was really an escape because we could write something onto the host file system that when someone logged in or when the machine rebooted would get run. But that wasn't very exciting. We wanted to be able to demo that visceral true escape thing where something's run on the guest and boom, something's running on the host. But I couldn't figure out how to do that until something hit me. We worked with a lot of really cool, great people on this project. One of them is H.D. Moore. I don't know if anybody knows who H.D. Moore is. He's the gentleman who developed Metasploit originally. And H.D. was a great guy. He talks faster than any other human being I've ever met. But he came up with a way to crash a virtual machine and crash it predictably. We could crash just the virtual machine itself. It didn't take down the whole VMware system. It just crashed a single virtual machine. And I got to thinking about that because at the time, if you crashed a process on Windows, there was another program that got run. Does anybody remember Dr. Watson under Windows? That would run whenever there was a crashed process on Windows. It did it allowed you to do kind of a post-mortem on whatever caused the process to crash. But because I could write to the host file system, and I was running as an elevated user, I could overwrite Dr. Watson. So that's what I did. I wrote some code that would overwrite Dr. Watson with the executable that we wanted to run. I would crash my virtual machine, Dr. Watson would run, and we'd have our escape. And it worked. But it only worked about 10% of the time. So I started looking at this, trying to figure out why isn't this a consistent thing? Why isn't it working all the time? And I found that there's this service under Windows called System File Protection. System File Protection did exactly what it sounds like it does. It monitored all these really important files under Windows to make sure they didn't get corrupted. If they got corrupted, it would replace them. So what was happening was, I was overwriting Dr. Watson, System File Protection was going, oh my, Dr. Watson got overwritten. I would crash the program, but before I got it crashed all the time, System File Protection would overwrite Dr. Watson back again. So here's the point of this. I could have been one of those elegant hackers and tried to find a way to disable System File Protection or find some other way around it. But I'm an ugly hacker, dirty, ugly hacker. So I went out and I found a list of all the files that System File Protection protected. There's about 40 of them altogether. I overwrote every one of them. Then I overwrote Dr. Watson, then I crashed the system. System File Protection is going, oh my God, what's going on? The entire world is coming to an end. All of my files are being overwritten, and it's going crazy trying to keep up with fixing everything. And before it can get to Dr. Watson, I've crashed the program and I'm done. We're running on the outside. And back in 2007, we were able to demonstrate the first publicly demonstrated escape from a virtual machine. And it was all because, instead of trying to be elegant, I killed that fly with a sledgehammer. All right? So that's what I mean by dirty hacker. Today, my goal here is I want to talk a little bit about my philosophy of security. Because I want each of you to walk out of here having learned something that I learned over the last couple decades of doing this. So here it is in a nutshell. The current security landscape, when I look at that, I see that we are failing miserably. The failure that I see has what I would consider to be a philosophical underpinning, meaning that it's a failure not just of processes, but it's a failure of the underlying philosophy that informs those processes. That's what I'd like to talk about today. And in order to talk about that, I'm going to tell another story. Well, hang on. Before I do that, I want to show you we really are failing. So I went out and I tried to find as updated of security statistics as I could. This was updated back in March. Worldwide, 60% of firms admitted to suffering a data breach. The median number of days it takes for an organization to discover that they have been breached, 277 days. Nearly 74% of breaches have a human element, meaning somebody clicked on something they shouldn't have, or somebody told somebody something they shouldn't have told them. Somebody logged into a system they shouldn't have logged into, or logged into a fake system that was set up using a phishing attack. 75% of firms have said that either a breach of their own or a breach of one of their close business partners has resulted in material damage, meaning costs, to their business process. 93% of incidents resulted in someone on the outside getting access on the inside. And finally, and this last one speaks to me very, very much, because in my spare time, I run a lot of honeypot systems on the internet, and I do a lot of searching on the internet, and I spend a lot of time trying to notify people that they are breached. 57% of organizations have no mechanism for reporting a security incident, no publicly known mechanism for reporting security incidents. I have spent so many hours trying to find ways to let people know that they are hacked. If you have any control over that in your organization, make sure you have something somewhere easily visible on your website, some method for contacting your organization from the outside to tell you you have a problem and you have been breached. So, I want to tell you another story. And I'm going to tell you this story not because there's any real egregious issues here. These are the kinds of issues that we saw all the time when I was doing pen tests and security audits. I want to tell you because it's actually very typical. All right? And this is going to go back to why do we fail? Well, we fail because we make faulty assumptions, and I have made my entire career out of challenging those faulty assumptions. So let's talk a little bit about this story. This is a war story for you. So back in the day, I was the technical lead on a project where we were testing a deployment of smart meter technology in the field by an electrical utility. They had done a whole lot of testing on all the pieces and parts separately. So they tested the meters, they tested the data concentrators, and I'll explain that in a minute. They'd done all of the testing on all of these things separately, but they brought us in to test the whole deployment in the actual field itself. Okay? So they had deployed this stuff, they brought us in to test it. We took a look at how they had deployed everything, and let me just give you a little quick brief overview of how they were deployed. Smart meters sit on the sides of homes or businesses, and they monitor electrical usage. Rather than having each of these smart meters talk back to their centralized systems, they had these devices out in the field called data concentrators. And these data concentrators would be set in various areas throughout their service area. And the smart meters themselves would talk back using either a short-haul radio or data over power line or something like that to these data concentrators. And then these data concentrators talked straight back into their head-end systems, usually over kind of a cellular modem or something like that. All right? Well, we took a look at all this and we decided we were going to target these data concentrators because we kind of had an idea of what might be going on. So we went out in the field and we found one of these data concentrators, and what it is it's just a big old weatherproof box mounted up on a pole someplace in the middle of a service area so that all the meters can talk to it. So we got our hard hats, and we got our vests, and we got a ladder, and we rented a van, and we went out to where this data concentrator was. We put our ladder up, we climbed up to the data concentrator, we picked the lock on the weatherproof enclosure, opened it up, and inside we found a computer, a single board computer inside of there. And to kind of date this a little bit, its entire file system was stored on what's called a PCM CIA card. We powered it down, we pulled the PCM CIA card out, tossed it down to a guy on the ground. He plugged it into an adapter, plugged it into his laptop, and took an image of it. Tossed it back up to the guy on the ladder, he plugged it back in, fired it back up, climbed back down the ladder, and we went back to the hotel. We mounted the image that we had taken of this PCM CIA card, and we found out it was just a generic Linux distribution. Now, we could have spent a whole lot of time digging through this file system that we'd taken an image of and trying to figure out what all the different processes and passwords and stuff were on there. But remember, dirty hacker, right? All we did was we took a look and put an is that me? We took an SSH key and put it into the authorized keys file for the root user on the Linux distribution. Imaged it back out to another PCM CIA card that we bought at a drugstore, went back out into the field, put on our vests and our hard hats, climbed up a ladder, pulled their PCM CIA card out, plugged ours in, fired it back up, plugged an Ethernet cable into one of the many Ethernet jacks that was on there, snaked it down the pole into the back of our van, and we sat in air-conditioned comfort. This was in the south of the United States. It was really hot. We sat in air-conditioned comfort in the back of our van and logged into this device from our laptops. We could do that because we were now root user on that box. What we discovered was that they had a VPN connection from that device over the cellular modem back into the head end of their data center, bypassing all the firewalls, bypassing every kind of security mechanism they might have, and we proceeded to then hack the daylights out of their head end systems because they subscribe to what I call armadillo security. Many organizations still do this today. Armadillo security, hard and crunchy on the outside, soft and chewy on the inside. Once we were past all the firewalls, once we had this nice path inwards, we had access to everything and there was nothing standing in our way. Remember this. We're going to talk about this a little more later on. So, we took them for everything they had. And we sat down and we talked to the people, our contacts on site, and told them what we had done. And they said, we need to have a debrief meeting. Okay, fine. So we all, we went home. We were all done. We went back home, and they scheduled a debrief meeting for us. I kind of thought that the debrief meeting was going to be a few of their technical people on a phone call. We get on this conference call, and there's 50 to 100 people on this conference call, everybody from their technical people all the way up to their C-level executives. So we begin to tell them the story. Yeah, we got a van, we got a ladder, we got hard hats, we got vests, we climbed up there, we pulled the PCM CIA card out, we added our key to it, we put it back in. We connected up to this device. Because we were root, we could bridge our network connection right on through this device, straight on back into your network. And we could attack everything. And about that time, there was a little bit of a lull in the conversation. And somebody on their end, and I still to this day believe it was probably someone who didn't know they were not on mute, said something that I think just kind of popped out. They said, "Well, that's not fair." They were absolutely right. It wasn't fair. It wasn't fair at all. But someone else in that meeting, and I don't know who it was, again, I sincerely hope it was somebody at their C-level executive positions, because whoever said this truly understands and truly gets it. They said something that I quote to this day to my children. Whoever told you that life was fair, they lied. You can feel free to use that on your kids, because I tell you, I've heard that tossed up in my face so many times from my children. Well, that's not fair. Whoever told you life was fair, they lied. The reason I tell you this story is because I think it shows some of the mechanisms of failure, and I think I want to review those a little bit here with you. These are the philosophical mechanisms of failure that I see in this particular story. Failure to address basic security, and we'll talk about that as we go through here. Locks are bad security. We trust us. And then finally, I have some bonus stuff I'm going to talk about at the end. You know, the internet really isn't as scary as you think it is. We'll talk about that. All right, let's go on. Failure to address the basics. When you're building a house, do you start with the roof? Absolutely not. You start with the foundation. Unless and until you've covered security basics, you should not be thinking about doing anything else. If you're securing your organization, remember, it's about process, not products, and that process comes from philosophy. Your organization's philosophy of security will inform your security process. And that's what you need to have in place. You cannot secure your organization with products. If somebody comes to you and says, oh, I could sell you this cute black box, you can put it on your network and it'll make you secure, escort them from the building, because that's not going to work. What do I mean by philosophy and all this? What do I mean by information security basics? All of this is what most people would talk about when they talk about information security basics. I don't mean that. Now, don't go back and say, Tom said none of this stuff is important, because I'm not saying it's not important. It is important, but it is not the information security basic. The true basic security is the ability to look at your organization through the eyes of an attacker. It's imperative that you do this. If you can't or you don't do this, everything else you do is going to come to naught. Anybody can run a bunch of tools against your network and call that a pen test. But unless they are looking at it from the eyes of an attacker, it's going to be meaningless. Because an attacker looks at your network in a very, very different way than you probably think they do. You need to think like a dirty hacker. There we go. You can't rely on your security people to do this for you. I'm very sorry if this is going to hurt some people's feelings. Your security team doesn't have the mindset to do this kind of stuff. Your security team does not have the mindset to think like an attacker or think like a dirty hacker. They are spending their time, or at least they should be spending their time, securing your network. And securing a network is very, very different. The mindset is very, very different from the mindset of someone who is trying to attack your network. And I've heard it time and again from people. Attacking an organization is just the opposite of securing it. No, it's not. The opposite of securing your organization is not securing your organization. It's not attacking it. It requires a different mindset. It requires a different way of thinking. As I said, I apologize for any people in the room who might take that as an ego hit, but it's true. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as to why here in a bit. When we look as an attacker at a network, how do we come up with how we're going to attack it? How did we decide what we were going to target when we targeted the smart meter deployment? We targeted that network by targeting something integral to the philosophy or the organization, and that is, who did they trust? And we're going to talk about this a little bit later on, a little more depth. But you target an organization by targeting who they trust. So we'll get to that in a little bit. But first of all, let me talk about one other thing here. Oh, I somehow bumped that, I guess. Locks. Let's talk about locks. Locks are horrible security. The weatherproof cabinet that this thing was in, this data concentrator was in, it was locked. It took us about 2 minutes, if that, to open that lock and get into that thing. Once we have physical access, it's always game over, folks. So locking stuff up doesn't always work. A year or two ago, I was doing a project where we were on site at a very large industrial controls deployment. And in this room that we went into, this control room that we went into, or this data center that we went into, they had racks upon racks of equipment in there. And when we went in, we asked, we walked around and all the cabinets were locked. And we asked one of the fellows there to go and get the keys because we wanted to look inside and see how things were laid out and see what was in the cabinets. And he went and got himself a big handful of keys. And there were multiple rows in here. And he went down one row with this handful of keys, this fistful of keys, looking up at the numbers on the top of each cabinet and going through all the keys, trying to find the proper numbered key to open the cabinets. I went down a different row with a set of lockpicks. Who do you suppose was done first? I was done well before he even got to the third cabinet. I had all the cabinets in my row open. And I'll tell you flat out, I'm really lousy at lockpicking. I can do it, but I'm not that great. Locks make horrible security. And why do locks make horrible security? If you rely on locks to protect something that's precious to you, it is going to fail. And it's going to fail in a way that's worse because it's given you a false sense of security. Locks are a false sense of security. Locks keep honest people honest. Those are the non-metaphorical locks. Let's talk about metaphorical locks for a minute. Your firewall is a metaphorical lock. Antivirus is a metaphorical lock. Network access control systems, that's a metaphorical lock. All of those things can be bypassed. We went on site to an organization one time. They put us into the basement room somewhere. They always put us into a basement room for whatever reason. I think they're ashamed to have us around. Anyway, they put us in a basement room, and they said, over there's some plugs on the wall. Feel free to plug in. Come get us when you want to get on the network. And they chuckled and left. So we went over and we plugged in, and sure enough, they had network access controls enabled. For those of you who don't know what a network access control is, it checks to see who you are when you connect up to the network, and if you're a known, recognized machine or system, it allows you onto the network. If you're an unknown machine, it puts you into a VLAN that has access to the internet, and that's it. So we looked at this, and we found out that they hadn't done a really good job of setting up their VLANs. They'd made some minor mistakes. We took advantage of those minor mistakes. VLAN hopped out of the network that it put us into, the VLAN that it put us into, and began scanning all of their systems. About 2 hours went by. They came back in, and they were angry. We brought you guys in here because we thought you were professionals, and you've been sitting in here doing nothing. You haven't even come to get us. We're not doing nothing. We're scanning your systems. And by the way, we found this one has this problem and this one has this problem. And the guy's like, wait. You're on our network? Yeah, we're on your network. How is that possible? So when we VLAN hopped out of the VLAN that you put us in. Hold on. Get away from everything. Hands off keyboards. Okay. We need to go and have a meeting. So we went and we had a meeting. In the meeting, they said, well, we hadn't given you our rules of engagement yet because we didn't think you were going to get onto our network. And they proceeded to tell us all of the rules of engagement, of what we could and couldn't touch. I'll tell you this flat out right now. If I'm testing your network and you have rules of engagement, every one of those rules of engagement is a finding. Because unless and until you have that same contract signed and worked out with every attacker on the internet, that they won't touch these systems over here, there's a problem. If you don't want me touching them. What can we do besides locks? Well, locks are important. I'm not saying don't have locks, don't have firewalls, don't have network access control. We need to supplement those things with something else. In the case of the cabinet where we climbed up on the ladder and got into that, what should they have done? What should they have had? A really cheap door sensor would have made all the difference in the world. If we opened the door of that cabinet up on that pole, somebody somewhere should have known about that. Yeah, we've got a lock, but you can't trust that lock. You have to have some sort of burglar alarm, some sort of door opening sensor that says, hey, this cabinet's open. Are you expecting this cabinet to be open? That's a non-metaphorical burglar alarm. Let's talk about a metaphorical burglar alarm. IDSs. Logging. Monitoring the logs of your IDSs and monitoring the logs of your systems for any kind of changes. When we got onto these people's network, when we VLAN hopped into their other networks, they should have been alerted to that. They should have had some kind of logging. But they were so enamored with this network access control system that they had, and they were so sure that that was going to keep people out, that when the lock failed, they had no burglar alarm to back it up. If you look at any bank you go to, they have locks, right? But they also have burglar alarms. Museums, where they're trying to protect precious things, they have locks, but they also have burglar alarms. So you have to have a lock and you have to have a burglar alarm to supplement it for when that lock fails. This is a big one. So when I said before, when we talk about how we target people, who do you trust? Well, most organizations fall for the trap of trusting themselves. We're the only people who are going to use this API. Our app is the only thing that's going to talk to this API. No, it's not. One of my favorite things when I do web app testing, you know those little drop-down boxes where you have like 10 different choices in it? How often do people think, oh, the only thing we're going to get from those is one of those 10 choices? No. I can put anything I want into the data that's going to come from that little drop-down box. And you'd better be prepared to accept that and not get owned by doing that. We trust us. This is one of the biggest things. Who do you trust? Oh, we don't trust anybody. Yeah, you do. You trust yourselves. And that's a problem. Assumptions. Who do you trust? You should trust no one, not even yourselves. Dirty hackers like me, we use your assumptions against you. When we approach an organization, when we were looking at this organization that deployed the smart meters, when we were trying to see what we were going to target, the question we asked ourselves is, who do they trust? And we were pretty sure they trusted themselves. They trusted the data connection coming in from those data concentrators, and they let it right in, and they didn't even look at what that thing was doing. Because it's our piece of equipment. We can trust it. It's our own piece of equipment. Not once we were through with it. It wasn't their piece of equipment anymore. It was our piece of equipment at that point, and we could do whatever we wanted with it. Ask yourself, in your organization or in any of the organizations you work with, who do they trust? You can pretty much assume they trust themselves, and you can pretty much assume there's other people that they trust. Those are how you're going to target that organization when you are looking at that organization like an attacker. Hacks are built by challenging the assumptions, and the biggest assumption people make is about who they can trust. All right, I want to talk about some bonus stuff. Remember I said I'm retired, and I do a couple projects a year that are interesting to me, right? I want to talk about the fact that the internet isn't as scary as you think. It's worse, far worse than you think. And why do I know that? Well, a few years ago, a friend of mine came to me and said, what if we could build a device that could capture and log every attack against it on every port, every protocol? How could we see every attack? We want it to listen and complete connections on every TCP port, 65,535 ports. Listen on every UDP port. Listen for ICMP. Listen for oddball protocols. Everything. We want to know everything that hits this thing. Is it possible? We want to monitor this from a lot of places on the internet. So he's talking to me about this, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, we get a beefy server, right? We're going to have to alter the operating system a little bit because it won't let you have that many open sockets. I'm going to have a lot of memory, a lot of processing power. How can I make this work? And then he says, we want to make this run on something cheap because we want to be able to use it all over the place. We want to put these things on a lot of different locations on the internet. Could we make it run on a Raspberry Pi? You got to be kidding me. A Raspberry Pi? I was just going to tell you we need a big beefy server. He said, think about it for a while. I've asked all the people here at our organization, and they said it can't be done. That's why I'm calling you, because I know you won't tell me it can't be done. You'll figure it out. So I figured it out. I figured out a different and unique way of making this happen. Listening on every port for every protocol. I think it was kind of an interesting way of doing it. The organization thought it was an interesting way of doing it. They're in the process of patenting it right now. It runs on a Raspberry Pi 4, and it uses only 3% processor, which I think is kind of fun. Oh, and you wouldn't believe the things we're finding. What if you could see everything that's going on the internet? What would you see if you could see everything that goes on the internet? This is what it looks like when it runs. I know it's kind of an eye chart, sorry. This is running in, I captured this running in real time. This is how fast and furious all of the attacks you see on a device if you can listen for everything. This is what you're going to see on the internet. Notice I'm capturing the actual contents of exploit attempts. Why? Because I'm completing TCP connections and getting everything that's coming in, and they're sending it right to me. All right, so this is what it looks like as it runs. It's kind of fun and interesting just to watch it scroll by. But how bad is it? Currently, I have a sensor. This is what we called it. We came up with a really unique name for it, sensor. I have it running on residential IP, my own IP. Over the past 30 days, I have seen 4.45 million attacks. That comes out to be 148,338 per day, or 1.7 attacks per second. 45,200 attacking IP addresses. What else can you see if you can see everything? Things to note. We can see the initial payload that gets passed in. From that, we can differentiate the kinds of attacks that we're seeing. And we can differentiate tools. There it goes. we can identify, for example, I can see an RDP attack. It looks like that up there at the top. MSTS hash administrator is what it would come out to be if it was the full thing. So over 30 days, I saw 58,627 attacks from 1,931 different sources against RDP. But the interesting thing is 19,430 different destination ports. RDP attacks are so juicy, such a big goal for these attackers that they're going after them on non-default ports. They're not going after 3389. They're going after a bunch of ports. I was trying to list it on the screen. I couldn't get them all on the screen. It was too small, the list of ports. Another example, SSH attacks. Over 30 days, 44,365 attacks, 1,600 sources, 624 different ports, not just port 22. They're going after a bunch of different ports because these are so exciting to them too. We were able to clock 44 different tools or versions of tools. And we were able to put together, now this is where it gets to be very, very interesting. We're able to put together groups. Groups use the same version of the tool, and they don't overlap IP addresses, meaning that, I'm sorry, they don't overlap ports. So they split up the ports amongst themselves. One group, we saw 384 source IPs, but they looked at 343 different ports. This is really interesting, exciting. I hope that over the next year or two, you're going to see a lot of interesting research come out of this. This is a tool, like I said, I wrote it for a very large corporation, and it kind of turned into much more than they thought it was going to. They're finding the information that they're coming up with by doing analysis on hundreds and thousands of these things spaced out all across the internet. The information that they're coming up with, they're doing big data analysis on it, and it's finding all kinds of interesting patterns, we'll say. And I'll just leave it at that. They're finding some interesting patterns going on the internet today. And the internet is a much scarier place than we thought it was before we had this tool available to show us what was really going on every port, on every protocol, on a bunch of IP addresses across the internet. All right, so thank you for listening. If you want to contact me about anything I've talked about today during this presentation, there's contact information up there. And if anybody has any questions, we got a little bit of time left. Does anybody have any questions? Too much, right? Too much to take in. No questions? This gentleman here has a question in the front. I don't think it's on. There it is.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Tom. Very interesting presentation. I have one question that may be somewhat philosophical when you mentioned that the security teams should not think like defenders, rather they should think like the attackers think.
No, I don't think security teams should be doing that. You need to have somebody in your organization that does that, but it shouldn't necessarily be your security team. Your security team needs to think like a security team, because that's what they're there to do. But you need to have either someone in your organization if you're big enough, or bring in somebody from the outside if you're not big enough who can think like an attacker. I really think those things need to be separate. Yeah, I think you turned it off.
My question is exactly about that separation. How do you see the evolution of organizations now that are adopting purple teams against the conventional red teams? How does that work out?
I think purple teaming is a wonderful idea, but I think, like I said, I think you need to have that separation within your organization. If you're going to do purple teaming, you need to have your security team, who does security, work with your attack team that does attacking. And I think those two need to be separate functions within an organization. Trying to combine those, it just doesn't work. Security people need to think like security people. They need to think about how to secure a system. The traditional red teamer needs to think like a red teamer, needs to think like an attacker and have that attacker mindset. And those are two very different mindsets, and I think it's a mistake to try to combine those into one single individual or one single team. Yes, sir.
Thank you for the insightful speech. What's your take on the traditional CSOC services that a lot of companies are utilizing today?
I think you need to be very, very careful outsourcing any kind of security function. If you're going to be outsourcing your SOC functionality to some other organization, you still need to have somebody on the inside that keeps those people honest. And the other thing that I think, and I think this is a very important point that people need to understand, and that is there's no one-size-fits-all security. Every organization is different. If your organization isn't different, why do you exist? I mean, if you don't have a different approach to your business, if you don't have a different way of doing things, why do you even exist? The only way you exist is if you do have a different way of doing things and you do have a different approach to how to secure your organization. So I think, like I said, I think I understand the cost savings, I understand the concept, but I think you need to have at least, you can't outsource all your security. You need to have somebody who tailors all of those external organizations to your particular security needs, which are different from everybody else's security needs. Okay.
Tom Liston, thank you very much.
Oh,
We are running out of time.
oh, we're running out of time. I'm sorry. We can talk. Okay.
Yes.
Yep.